Check it out. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast. My name is Jacob Paveo, coming to you from the Great White North each and every Tuesday evening. Finally recording from the completed new studio. So if there are sound changes, I apologize. I think it's going to take me a little bit because I'm on like a new PC and everything. So I'm trying to get the settings the same and whatnot, going back and forth computer to computer. But either way, we will make it work. Thank you so much for tuning into the show this week. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. If you're here every week, shout out to you. We have been consistently charting in Canada, which is pretty awesome. Typically, we drop off the charts on like Sunday and Monday, and then right back in it on Tuesday morning. So it's awesome to see all the support. And yeah, really, really nice that we are growing as we are. There is some big stuff to talk about, but first, if you're interested, there is, of course, merch over at www.laughtolearnpodcast.com/store. You can also use the contact page there. Send me emails, send me your thoughts on the show, send me date requests. I don't know. Hey, if you're rich and you want to fly me to Barbados for the week, I'll spend a week with you. You know what I'm saying? So send all those inquiries there using that contact page. And yeah, thank you so much once again for showing up this week. This is a really important week, though. And it's kind of crazy because last week we talked about Russia a little bit, and I said that everything that's going on in Russia, it's a whole lot of nothing, and it still might be a whole lot of nothing, but yesterday, there was some really big news. I'm off this week, so I'm actually able to record Wednesday morning. It's like 11 a.m. on Wednesday morning, shortly before the podcast goes live. So it's nice to be able to record so close to posting the episode, and there is so much active news happening right now. So really, I knew I had to do a proper Russia-Ukraine episode yesterday when this story broke. So this is from Tuesday, February 22nd. I'm using CTV News for both stories we're covering today, which is unusual, but nonetheless, yesterday, basically the title of this story, it is Biden, Putin signal bigger confrontation ahead over Ukraine. And this is actually through the Associated Press, published in Canada through CTV News. And I just have to read it because it really tells us all that we need to know. And yeah, this might actually end up becoming one of the biggest stories, like bigger than COVID even was as far as its impact on the world, which is crazy to say. But again, this is yesterday, Tuesday, February 22nd, in the morning, 4:04 a.m. local time here. So this would have been about 12 or 1 p.m. local time in Russia when all of this went down. And it reads as such. The East-West face-off over Ukraine escalated dramatically Tuesday, with Russian lawmakers authorizing Vladimir Putin to use military force outside his country, and U.S. President Joe Biden and European leaders responding by slapping sanctions on Russian oligarchs and banks. Both leaders signaled that an even bigger confrontation could lie ahead. Putin has yet to unleash the force of the 150,000 troops massed on the three sides of Ukraine, while Biden held back on even tougher sanctions that could cause economic turmoil for Russia, but said they would go ahead if there is further aggression. The measure accompanied by the repositioning of additional U.S. troops to the Baltic nations on NATO's eastern flank bordering Russia, came as Russian forces rolled into rebel-held areas in eastern Ukraine after Putin said he was recognizing the independence of the separatists' region in defiance of U.S. and European demands. I'm going to pause for a second to update you on the picture of what's happening. So, the Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and they have recently, in 2014, stated that they wish to join NATO. Now, there are a lot of things that you need to accomplish, I guess you could say, before NATO allows you to join their strategic alliance. Of course, NATO is predominantly ran by the United States, but it also includes many countries in the European Union. In fact, most. The UK is included, Canada, Australia, Japan. Basically, if you can think of the 20 richest countries in the world, except China and Russia, and I guess India. So it's by far NATO is the most powerful military alliance in the world. But the Ukraine in 2014, when this all happened, when the former leader of Ukraine stated they wished to join NATO, the folks in eastern Ukraine did not want that to happen. They actually wanted to join Russia's modern alliance. So basically, the country was split, where you had 3 regions in eastern Ukraine, I believe it's 3, who wanted to join the Russian alliance, and then that's about 1.5 million people by what I've read online. And the rest of the country wanted to join the European Union, and they wanted to join NATO from a military alliance perspective. So they want to join the EU for the economic benefit, and they wanted to join NATO for the military benefits. Now, what ended up happening was Russia had created a deal when the Soviet Union fell. It was one of the first things that modern Russia actually did, and they made all of their former allied well, they weren't allied, but they were part of the Soviet Union. They were one giant country. They made them sign an agreement that they would not join NATO. So this includes Sweden, Austria, Finland, the Ukraine. It goes on and on. Now, to date, 2 of those countries, back in 99 and 2003, actually joined NATO. I don't have the names in front of me. I mentioned them last week. I don't recall what countries they are right now off the top of my head, but 2 of those countries, there's about 7 in total, and 2 of them did join NATO back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And on top of that, Finland and Sweden, who have not joined NATO, they are basically members of NATO. They have strong support. They allow NATO presences in their country. Their airspace and their military bases are able to be accessed by NATO. They share information with NATO, but they don't want to break the agreement that was signed with Russia. Now, what that means, and the big thing here, although both of those countries are part of the European Union, so NATO has a clause which is the most important part of the alliance, and it is that an attack on one is an attack on all. So any border infraction or any attack against any NATO ally is seen as an attack against NATO. And as I said, that includes the United States, Canada, the UK, most of the European Union, Japan, Australia. You are literally, and then on top of that, of course, as we saw in the First and Second World War, then there are other parts, other allegiances and allies that come from that. So, for example, if you attack NATO, it is also considered an attack against Turkey, who are allied with a number of countries across the Middle East that would come to the defense of Turkey if Turkey was attacked, which technically Turkey is attacked by attacking NATO, right? So all of a sudden, like, whatever country it is really screwed, including Russia and China. Like, you're screwed. But, as I mentioned, the Ukraine is not a part of NATO, nor are they a part of the European Union. Now, with the European Union, they have a similar clause, but it's worded differently, where it is not actionable. So, as a signatory to NATO, you legally have no choice. Now, of course, who's going to hold you accountable for that and whatnot? But there's really no denying that what they require to join NATO is firm evidence that you will support a few main parts of the agreement, the biggest one being an attack against one is an attack against all. The European Union, however, they have similar defensive agreements, but the Ukraine is not a signatory to them. However, Sweden and Finland both are. So if you attack Sweden and Finland, the European Union nations would be triggered into war, and then NATO technically would be triggered into war, but the Ukraine is not included in that. So right now, 3 sides of the Ukraine are bordered by Russia, and the other side is the Northern European Union. So NATO has aligned the southern, or I suppose it's the eastern, or rather the western, I'm running out of directions, Ukrainian border. Russia has covered the northern and eastern sides, as well as the southern side, I suppose. I'm trying to picture Russia or Ukraine in my head. The north, east, and south side of the Ukrainian border are flanked by 150,000 Russian troops, and they are, as I said, preparing for a bigger confrontation as Vladimir Putin received legal approval within Russia to use military force outside of Russia, which of course is the Ukraine. Continuing with the story. Speaking at the White House, Biden said that the Kremlin had flagrantly violated international law in what he called the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. He warned of more sanctions if Putin went further. Quote, "We are united in our support of Ukraine. We are united in our opposition to Russian aggression. None of us should be fooled. None of us will be fooled. There is no justification." And that's a quote from U.S. President Joe Biden. Hopes for a diplomatic resolution to the threat of invasion, which U.S. officials have for weeks portrayed as all but inevitable, appeared to evaporate. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken canceled plans for a Thursday meeting in Geneva with his Russian counterpart, saying it would not be productive and that Russia's actions indicated Moscow was not serious about a peaceful path to resolving the crisis. To add to this, last week, Vladimir Putin sat down with Macron, the president of France, and then the new guy who's running Germany, whose name I can't remember, the new chancellor of Germany. He sat down with both of them, and after both of their meetings, talked mad shit about them, and basically said that these guys can't make me any promises because we all know that the United States runs NATO, and whatever agreements we were to ever come to, the U.S. would not be beholden to them, so there's no point in us talking. So now the U.S. isn't happy because they were relying on these 2 meetings with France and Germany to kind of gauge what's happening, and Russia was just like, fuck this, like this is just a useless meeting with useless governments. Now, the real unfortunate thing here is how powerful Russia is making themselves appear to be. And I word it like that quite intentionally because they are not, and I've said this many times before, Russia is not a frightening global power. I mean, they have nuclear weapons, but like I did read a story where there are like 13 nuclear capable warships or whatever that are right now in the Baltic Sea, I believe it is, pointed towards the Ukraine. And, I read that and I just think, man, I don't see it happening. I really don't, because maybe like tactical nuke or something like that, where you're talking about like a blast radius of like, half a kilometer, like something small. They can't use nuclear weapons against the Ukraine, especially because if they're willing to do that, because they don't need to, right? Like they have the power, they have the personnel to just walk through the Ukraine. It's sorry, Ukrainians, but it's true. And without the use of nuclear technology, they can do that. But if they choose to use nuclear technology, it tells the rest of the world that they're just going to use nuclear technology if they start to push forward into Europe. Now, there's no sign that they're going to do that. In fact, it's quite the opposite, where most people would probably tell you that there's no way that they are going to continue to move into Europe. And now there's been tons of sanctions placed. I'm not going to read through the rest of the story, but basically Germany has stopped a huge gas pipeline that was supposed to go from Russia right through to Germany, that was really pushed by the Russian government. They really wanted it to happen. Finally, Germany and the European Union unanimously agreed to allow this pipeline to happen, and now the pipeline has been canceled. As well, in the U.S., they've cut off $80 billion in assets to Russian billionaires and wealthy Russian individuals. As well, American banks are blocking trading on American and European markets from Russian finance companies. So big things are happening, right? Biden also said he's moving additional U.S. troops to the Baltics, though he described the deployment as purely defensive, asserting, quote, "We have no intention of fighting Russia," end quote. The U.S. is sending about 800 infantry troops and 40 attack aircraft to NATO's eastern flank from other locations within Europe, according to a senior defense official. In addition, a contingent of F-35 Strykers and AH-64 Apache attack helicopters will also be relocated. So basically, the U.S. is not preparing for anything on the ground. NATO does have a number of ground troops in the area, but they are hoping that if anything is to happen, the U.S. can deal with it from the sky. And to be perfectly honest, the U.S. doesn't have to tell us where their remote vehicles are going, but if you watched the Super Bowl, you would have seen that when they did the flyover of the American national anthem, the plane in the middle was not a plane, it was an unmanned drone. And that is basically, like, the U.S. doesn't have to say where their unmanned drones are because it's not personnel. So legally, they actually don't have to talk about it at all with anyone, which is kind of a crazy thing that I'm assuming will change in the near future. But the U.S. is likely planning on just using drones to deal with this because, as I said, Russia is really not as relevant as they want people to think that they are. And the way that they're handling France and Germany, and the way, to be honest with you, that France and Germany have allowed Russia to handle them, right? Because you sit down with him, you have this conversation, and he leaves with the ability of talking that kind of shit after you leave, saying like, well, it wasn't Joe Biden, so it was a useless meeting. Thanks for wasting my time. It's kind of like, you really have to stake your claim. Like, look, dude, you are Russia. You are the smallest economy. Like, France has more nuclear weapons than Russia. And there's a whole thing where France doesn't talk about their nuclear arsenal. But if I was Macron, that's how I would have approached that meeting. Like, once they started talking like that, I would have been like, you realize that we have more nuclear capabilities than you do, right? Like, this is not a one-sided argument, and Russia is so good at manipulating the Western media that they have made it into a one-sided conflict. Like, this is not China. And I say that all the time because it's not. China literally is successfully running concentration camps that the rest of the world knows about. They're successfully running them in the north of their country. And there's nothing that we can do about it because of how powerful China is. Russia can't do that. Russia can't run their own country. The entire Asian, like towards Asia, that whole eastern side of Russia is like, they don't give a fuck about Moscow. They don't listen to them. They don't follow their laws. They do their own thing. Like, they are completely autonomous. And other than the fact that they say, sure, we live in Russia, right? Like, they can't even control within their own border. So, you know, you really have to look at Russia through a knowing perspective of what's going on and what the actual potential consequences are here. And they are great. They are significant consequences if large-scale war is to break out, but it just seems so unlikely even still, because Russia has now said that all they're interested in are taking over the 3 zones in the Eastern Ukraine, which the Ukrainian government signed a document in 2014 saying that those 3 zones can be considered autonomous and make their own decisions for their future, essentially. And they are run by rebel groups who support Russia, and Russia is coming in to take over those groups. Now, that seems fairly democratic to me, if Russia stops at that line. And that's kind of where I approach this from. And now, the Western nations can't say that. You will never hear them say that they are okay with Russia taking over these, these regions of the Ukraine that are entirely backed by rebel forces who want to be a part of Russia. But the thing is, like, from my perspective, go be a part of fucking Russia. You know what I mean? And it's a little difficult for us in the West to look at this because, you know, like here in Canada, the province of Quebec is now considered a nation within a nation. Like, we signed all the documents and stuff for that. But they want to be autonomous. They don't want to join, like, they're not going to join fucking Russia. They don't want to join France. Like, they want to do their own thing, right? The idea of having a small region who's like, here in Canada, they would want to join, Russia in the north or the U.S. in the south. It's just not a thing, right? It's never going to happen. People don't think like that, right? We are not beholden to a nation in the way that they are in Eastern Ukraine. Because you also have to realize that when the Soviet Union fell, they were one giant country that just got split up. And there are lots of people who did not want to get split up. It's kind of like when you see people flying the Confederate flags in the southern U.S., where they're still upset that great-granddaddy lost the war. That's literally what we're seeing right now. Young people are upset that their grandparents lost the war. And they want to join the country that formed, that their grandparents fought for. Because they didn't fight for the Ukraine. The Ukraine is a relatively new nation. It didn't exist before the late 80s, early 90s, or whatever it is, right? They formed after the fall of the Soviet Union to be what they are today. It existed in the past, but they didn't exist for decades under the Soviet Union, because that's what they were, was the Soviet Union. But today, things escalated further this is the point where I was like, whoa, okay, this is a bad sign. This is a really bad sign. So this is Wednesday morning, February 23rd at 5:24 a.m. local time. So again, that'll be about 12 or 1 o'clock Russian time. This is, again, a story from the AP that was published in Canada through CTV News, written by Adasha Litvinova and Yuras Karmanau. something like that. Russia evacuating embassy in Ukraine as crisis escalates. This is a story from Kiev, and it states, Russia began evacuating its embassy in Kiev, and Ukraine urged its citizens to leave Russia on Wednesday as the region braced for further confrontation after Vladimir Putin received authorization to use military force outside his country, and the West responded with sanctions. Hopes for a I need to learn how to speak. Hopes for a diplomatic way out of a new, potentially devastating war in Europe appeared all but sunk as the U.S. and key European allies accused Moscow on Tuesday of crossing a red line in rolling over Ukraine's border into separatists' regions, with some calling it an invasion. I should have mentioned that Russia did move their troops into these Eastern Ukrainian areas. There was no conflict because, as I said, the areas are run by separatist groups who want to be a part of Russia, so they welcome them in. But they are now technically in the Ukraine. Russia began pulling personnel from its diplomatic posts in Ukraine, state news agency TASS reported, a day after the foreign ministry announced a plan to evacuate, citing threats. By Wednesday afternoon, the Russian flag was no longer flying over the embassy in Kiev, and police surrounded the building. After weeks of trying to project calm, Ukrainian authorities also signaled increasing concern on Wednesday. The foreign ministry advised against travel to Russia and recommended anyone there leave immediately, saying Moscow's, quote, aggression, end quote, could lead to a significant reduction in consular services. The head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council called for a nationwide state of emergency subject to parliamentary approval. Alexei Danilov said it will be up to regional authorities to determine which measures to apply, but they could include additional protection for public facilities, restrictions on traffic, and additional transport and document checks. Basically, the Ukraine is at war, and that's how they are looking at this, which is a big, big, big escalation. These were just the latest in a series of signs of escalating tensions. Kiev recalled its ambassador to Russia and considered breaking all diplomatic ties with Moscow. Dozens of nations further squeezed Russian oligarchs and banks out of international markets. Germany halted the pipeline. The U.S. repositioned troops to the NATO's eastern border. And as we also mentioned, top U.S. diplomat canceled a meeting with his Russian counterpart. Now, as of today, there are still 150,000 troops massed on three sides of the Ukraine. The majority of those troops are still there. They did not enter the Ukraine en masse. And the Ukraine foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, urged Western leaders not to wait. He said, quote, "We call on partners to impose more sanctions on Russia now. Now the pressure needs to step up to stop Putin. Hit his economy and cronies, hit more, hit hard, hit now," end quote. And that was written on Twitter, which is fucking awesome. Russia's foreign ministry has also bristled at the sanctions, saying, quote, "Russia has proven that with all the costs of the sanctions, it is able to minimize the damage," end quote. Which is just so funny because it's so not true. Like, it's so odd how Russia keeps talking about themselves like they're the Soviet Union, like they're this super wealthy, super capable superpower, you know? And they're just not anymore. Like, they don't have that kind of money. Like, if you were to block $80 billion from, $80 billion from Canada, we literally would not even notice, right? Literally, like, there would be no impact at all here economically. Forget about the U.S. or, you know what I mean? Like, 80 billion to the U.S. is like, they can print that in probably 15 or 20 minutes and not even notice. So, but 80 billion US dollars to Russia is huge. Like, this pipeline is worth a few billion, and they put everything into making it happen. It was like the number one thing that their government wanted to happen was this pipeline from Moscow to Germany, or not from Moscow, but from Russia to Germany. They wanted it more than anything. It was so important to their economic stability. And now that's gone. Plus, they're blocking $80 billion so far. And the number is probably way higher because you know that American hackers and stuff like that right now that are funded by government agencies and whatnot are just attacking Russian crypto agencies, Russian banks. Like, they're going hard today. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the internet slows down a little bit over the next few days just because of how hard allied hackers are going to be attacking Russian computer infrastructures. And now all of this leads us to today, where we are now. So that was at 5 a.m. It's now, or just before around 5:30. It's now like 11:30. So it's been about 6 hours. And so far, scrolling through the news, nothing has changed. There's been no invasion. There's been no, no live gunfire or anything like that going on. Just continued talks of the state of emergency across the Ukraine, and then Putin did put out a statement this morning to the Russian people saying that security is non-negotiable, as Putin says that the U.S. is warning of an invasion. I have not seen anything like that, any sort of discussion like from sources or the U.S. at all, that they're talking about invasion. It seems rather unlikely, because, just being honest with you, the United States does not want to have to control the Ukraine. They just don't. I was actually thinking about this before, kind of off topic, but there's that conversation of what is the best political system, and basically why is it democracy. And in my opinion, the biggest advantage of a democracy is that so far, from any political system we've ever seen, it is the one where it, at its very core, its citizens do not want to take over other areas, because under a democracy, the cost of doing so is greater than any benefit. Just significantly greater for any democratic nation to take over an additional region, because within a democracy becomes these social standards that have to be achieved, right? And to walk through, from a military perspective, destroy a country and take it over, you then have to rebuild that country to match your standards, and no one wants to do that. Whereas outside of a democracy, any sort of they were all forms of dictatorship. You would be able to walk into the Ukraine, flatten it, take it over, put your troops around its border, and then say, figure it out, Ukrainian people. You are now Russian, right? And you don't have to worry about them. They'll figure it out on their own. It doesn't work in a democracy, because then your leaders, when those people vote, won't vote for you, and then you'll lose the election, right? So democracy allows citizens to really develop their own infrastructures, and it stops them from wanting to take over others. So that's my side note, my side piece of wisdom for the day. But yeah, what I'm seeing right now is basically a stalemate. They are obviously, all of the Russian political leaders and whatnot are leaving the Ukraine. Anyone who was at their embassy is gone as well. Ukrainian individuals working in Russia and living in Russia across the board have been asked to leave. So I'm assuming there is a big rush for the borders, and for air traffic and stuff like that is probably pretty crazy to fly back. They're probably trying to fly back to Europe to then drive or take a train or whatever back home to the Ukraine. But things are at a stalemate right now. I'm hoping that, again, this just kind of blows over, and it seems like if Russia just goes in and takes over these, like Crimea was one of the three areas that it was owned by the Ukraine, but being run by a separatist group that wanted to join Russia. And I've mentioned this before. It's super democratic to allow them to do that. It just is. Like, honestly, if you have a region in your country that does not want to be a part of your country and they would vote against it, I think you should allow them to vote and allow them to leave. You know, it only makes sense to do so if the population wants it. And right now you have the 2 more regions now that Russia has gone into. And I think officially now Russia is in Crimea. They technically weren't before. So now there are actual Russian troops wearing Russian military gear in Crimea, as well as these 2 other Ukrainian regions. And I kind of hope that it just kind of blows over and we don't see fighting. Typically, fighting will not happen during the day. It'll usually start late evening and overnight with artillery strikes and bombing. So that would probably happen tonight if it's going to start, because this is the first night really that there are no political people in the area and everyone's been warned. The Ukraine has been locked down. They're probably going to have curfews tonight. And yeah, I really, really, really hope it doesn't get to that point, but it may. A side story here is that Europe has also stated that they are bracing for full-scale war. So there are European countries that are actually prepping their citizens for war. They're preparing bomb shelters and stuff like that, reopening them, cleaning them out, getting supplies into their bomb shelters. Just crazy. Like, it's a crazy, crazy time. Now, what this means for us here, because, of course, northern Canada and northern Russia share a border, it probably doesn't mean too much. I've said it before. If Russia tries to come north, you're talking full-scale global conflict. It probably won't honestly last very long, and it would be a crazy few months at most, but it could happen, I guess. I really question, though, whether or not this is just being blown out of proportion, because Russia's probably going to take these 3 zones and say that these people want to live in Russia, so we're going to allow them. They'll expand the Russian border slightly, and they'll just kind of chill. And I think that'll be it for another few years. Another thing that's really interesting that I've been looking at and reading about is whether or not this would have happened if Trump was president. And I have to actually agree with a lot of opinions that it wouldn't have, because it seemed like Putin wanted to do this long ago, but with Trump in office from 2018, it seemed like, he might just openly attack for no apparent reason, because he wasn't happy with the decision that you made. Whereas, of course, it doesn't seem that Biden has that in him, although time will tell. So, again, hopefully this blows over. Hopefully this is really as far as it goes. But keep an eye on this story. This is the big one right now. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning into the show this week, for sticking with it to the end. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you have a really good day. We had freezing rain last night. That is now like a solid inch or 2 of ice. So we salted the driveway and everything, but the freezing rain washed all the salt away and then froze over top. So the salt did nothing. And now it's snowing on top of that. So the roads here are crazy, but it's crazy weather this time of year here in Canada, but nonetheless, winter is upon us. So I hope wherever you are that the sun is shining, and if the sun's not shining, don't let it spoil your day. We don't let the weather decide how we feel. And yeah, I hope you have a great one. If you haven't done so already, you can hit that subscribe button, tell your friends and family, share links, Word of mouth is a great way to share the show as well. Post the episode if you liked it on your social media feed. That would be pretty dope. Share it on your stories and all that. It is a great way to let everyone know what you've been listening to. That being said, I hope that you keep social distancing, keep wearing your masks, keep getting vaccinated, keep on laughing, and keep on learning.